This morning we're going to talk a bit about why 2 hives are better than 1. If you have a look at this hive here, it's going okay, but it's not really starting to store honey yet. So if you have a look down the cells, the bees are just starting to work, but it's been many months now. Now this hive had a bit of a journey. It actually went to a wedding, and the colony got moved around to different boxes and so on, and in that process we lost the queen, and it raised a new queen if you've been following this hive through our Facebook lives. And so the colony is okay, but it's slowed everything down. Now another hive could have been storing a lot of honey by now, and so if you only have one hive you might miss the season. So it's always good to have a number of hives, because typically one will do okay, one might do poorly, another one might just really be bringing in the honey. So another hive or a third hive really increases your chances of getting a good honey flow. As well, if you've got a hive that loses its queen, you can give it the resources to make a new queen from one of your other hives. So there's lots of benefits to having 2 hives or 3 hives or more. Now what we're going to do today is take a look inside this hive. We're going to pull it all apart, see how it's going, check that it's happy and healthy. So taking off that cover, next we're going to take off the roof, but before I do that I'm just going to protect myself by putting on my bee suit. So if you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them while we're on this call. Today we're talking about why 2 hives are better than 1, and also doing a brood inspection and a flow frame inspection. So we'll be doing a complete pull down of this hive to have a look and check that it's happy and healthy. I'm just taking off the lid or roof. We'll put that aside, and then we're going to prise open the inner cover. To do that, you get your hive tool, make sure it's nice and clean, because you don't want to share pathogens from one hive to another. Okay, so you can see in here there's bees, but it's not really pumping yet. We're not expecting it to really go that well just yet, because it's a time with not much of a honey flow at the moment. So you can see the bees are getting a little bit antsy here, so we're going to blow a bit of smoke into the hive and see if we can get them in a calm demeanour. So if you've left your smoker for a while like I have, it starts to go out and you need to pump it a little bit to get it going again. Okay, and when it's blowing nice cool smoke, you don't want to see flames shooting out here, or that will burn your bees. You want to see nice, cool bellows of smoke coming out.
Amy's asking what the temperature is here today. She's just trying to learn when it's suitable to open up a hive to do inspections.
Okay, great question. Now, mid-morning to mid-afternoon on a sunny day is the best time to be opening your hive. Some areas in the world it's much cooler than here. We live in a subtropical climate. This is our winter, and it's quite a warm day today, so pretty much any time of the year is good for us to be doing brood inspections. However, on rainy days, on cold, rainy, windy days, it's not as good as a time. The bees tend to be all home. They tend to be a little more aggressive in those times. So what you want is a nice sunny day when the bees are all out foraging and they're busy doing their work, and they're less likely to be defending their hive. In terms of the temperature, if it is a cold day when you happen to be having to pull your hive apart, just make sure you don't leave uncapped brood outside of the hive for too long, because that's when the bees need to keep that uncapped brood nice and warm. So if I pull out one of these flow frames just by inserting the chisel end under here and the J end under here. And I can use my hand at this end, and let's just have a look at what's going on here. Oh, lovely. So we're starting to see honey be stored in this region. So that's typical starting spot, is in the center of the frame, and then working their way out to the extremities. So that's really good news. So the colony is doing fine. You can see that honey glinting down the cells. The bees are just even starting to cap some of the cells down here by my finger. Beautiful. That's a wonderful thing to watch them do their work and coat everything in wax and draw those cells out, fill it with their nectar. And now what they're doing now is they're dehydrating that nectar by both using their bodies to do that as they move honey around, but also by evaporating the nectar, and then they're reducing it down to the water contents less than 20% so that it can store. So when it's capped is the time when the bees have decided it's ready to store, and that's the time when it's ready to harvest also. So if you've got questions, put them in the comments below. No such thing as a silly question. The other side's looking really nice as well. You can see here all this area is starting to be filled with honey.
Cedar Vichoi seems to think that smoke is harmful or not good for the bees. Can you speak on that?
It is true that I think if I was a bee, I wouldn't like smoke being blown in my face. It's an age-old tradition for beekeepers in order to calm the hive, but there are alternatives. If you've got a particularly gentle hive, then you may not need to smoke them at all. But what's worse is having them really agitated. A lot of bees get squashed. A lot of bees will lose their stingers in your bee suit, and you might get stings if you aren't able to calm them in some way. So we try to use a minimum of smoke, but there are people that experiment by using water sprays. The theory is that the water lands on the bees, and then they have to temporarily clean themselves to get that water off, so that kind of grounds those bees that are protecting the hive. But when I've tried it on really aggressive hives, it hasn't really worked at all. So I'm still reverting to the smoker. Keep the questions coming in. Next, what we're going to do is take off this box. So I'm just waiting till they get nice and calm. Another thing smoke can do is actually taint your honey. So if you've got a lot of uncapped honey in your hive and you use a lot of smoke, then you'll actually taste the flavour of the smoke in the honey, which might be an acquired flavour. Keep asking questions.
Robert's asking if the tool you're using is like a 5-in-1 tool.
This one is called the J tool, and that's the one that comes with our bee suit. If you get one of our bee suits or bee jackets, then you'll also receive this tool. It's my favourite. You've got the hook for hooking frames out. You've also got the chisel for chiselling the wax and splitting the hives apart and so on. It's also got a nail puller, which I don't use very often at all, but useful to hang it on the wall as well. So next we're going to separate the brood box from the super. So to do that, I'm going to insert the chisel end in here and just start to split the boxes apart. Now sometimes the excluder will stay underneath and sometimes it'll go on top. So I'm going to try and keep it on the brood box by going above the excluder. Now if I go around and do the same thing on this corner, then I've really loosened up the box. This point here, which is the flow frame rear door, is a great spot to lift. You're better off lifting this way than you are this way. This way the weight's further out and it's more of a strain on your back. Now there's a handle at this end, so all I'm going to do is come straight up. If it is really full of honey, it will be heavy, but this isn't full of honey. You can see that it's not so heavy. Now I'm just going to put that aside over here while I work the hive.
Cedar, Mark has a strong hive and he put the super on last week. The bees are moving up into the super and sealing the cells. How often should he be checking the brood box now?
So it really depends where you are. The best information to find out how often you'll need to check your brood box will come from your local beekeepers. Different parts of the world have different issues and they need different levels of inspections. Now here, commercial operators will check their brood box routinely twice a year, or if needed, let's say the bee numbers are dropping and they need to have a look to make sure there's a queen or there's no pests or disease issues that are causing that drop in numbers. In other parts of the world you've got varroa mite that needs managing, and during the summer months may need far more frequent inspections in order to keep those mites in check, depending on what strategy you're using to manage the mites. In Australia we don't have the varroa mite, so it's a bit less demanding. So next I'm going to take the queen excluder off. So what this is a grid that basically doesn't let the queen through. Because the queen is bigger than the bees, she can't get through this queen excluder, and then that stops her from laying eggs in your flow frames. Some queens will lay eggs in flow frames and some won't. So I've got hives that I run without an excluder, but you need to know what your queen will and won't do in order to make that choice.
Kat's asking, if I place an upper entrance shim above the queen excluder, will I have to worry about the bees packing pollen in the flow frames?
Generally bees will keep the brood. Sorry, that was if there's an upper entrance.
Yeah.
If there's an upper entrance, and generally if you're using a top entrance, you'll not use the queen excluder. Otherwise a queen may go on a mating flight and return to the top and then be laying in the honey box, which is not what you want. So in that case you would have an upper and a lower entrance, and generally they'll keep the brood at the bottom in that scenario, and they'll keep the pollen stores near the brood, so you should get very little in your flow frames. But if you are doing that without an excluder, make sure to check she isn't a queen that will lay in flow frames. And you can do that just by having a good look every now and then. Now these bees are a little bit antsy, so I'm going to just gently lift off this excluder. So I'm just peeling it off nice and slow. If I jerk it now, they'll probably just get a little bit more agitated. So if you find your bees are more agitated, have your gloves handy and put them on. If you're new to beekeeping, just put them on in the beginning until you get very comfortable in working your hive. So I'm going to put my gloves on now.
Cedar, Brandon says he'd love a flow hive, but they're so expensive. You can actually get 6 complete hives and it would still be cheaper.
Okay, you must be finding pretty cheap complete hives to get 6. I guess to speak to that, what we've done is got a whole lot of equipment and condensed it into the hive, so you no longer need your honey spinner, you no longer need tall stacks of hives, you no longer need the space requirements in your house. So to compare apples with apples, you actually need to compare what the Flow Hive does, which is from a very small footprint. You get an end product directly from the hive without all the labour and without all of the mess, space and equipment requirements that you would otherwise need. So when you weigh that all up, you may find that it's quite economical to have all of that systems, all of that equipment condensed into a turnkey solution. However, if you do want to do a Flow Hive in a less expensive way, then we have plans for you to just adapt a box, a conventional bee box, into a Flow Hive, and we show you exactly how to cut that out. We've got videos and templates in order to fit your flow frames. You may just choose to put 3 flow frames in the centre of your super, and that way you could have honey on tap in quite an affordable way as well, if your budget is constraining you. Great question. Keep the questions coming.
Eric's wondering, what do you do with the smoker after you've finished inspecting the hive?
Okay, so smokers can be a fire hazard, so that's a good point. We after we're finished, we either put something in the front to snuff it out, and then at home I usually put that in a metal garbage bin so that it isn't likely to catch anything on fire. Now, alternatively, you can tip the ash out, but you need to be mindful of where you're tipping it in terms of fire risk, especially if it's a dry time. And we do have areas of Australia where you aren't even allowed to use smokers at certain high fire danger times of year. Okay, keep the questions coming. We're just going to have a look in this brood box now and check it's happy and healthy.
Huey would like to know if you're planning to design a flow super using polystyrene material so it can fit with the Paradise bee box.
Okay, Paradise bee box. And styrofoam, some beekeepers are interested in using styrofoam, which is has some insulating properties. Now, in this case, you'll need to adapt your flow frames to fit by making the necessary cutouts in the polystyrene if you choose to go that way. Okay, so next I'm going to cut some of this honey. You can see it joining these frames together. You can see it all the way along here. So what I'm going to do is slice along there and also slice along the other side. Now it does spill a bit of honey into the hive, but the bees will readily clean that up. Now, slicing here. The reason why I'm cutting it away is when you pull that first frame out, it's quite a tight fit and you don't want those bits of comb digging into the comb surface and damaging it. I'm also going to lever this frame slightly over and see if we can get this out. And also in between the frames to break that propolis. Now let's have a look and see if this is the right frame to be pulling out first. Sometimes they're a little stuck together and it's best to choose a different frame for that first one you pull out in order to make sure you don't squash too many bees in the process. What you don't want to do is roll bees. Roll bees is a term used to when the frames pull out, the bees can get rolled between the frames. If there's lots of bees in the hive like this is in the brood nest. If you add a bit of smoke, then the bees will clear away from that area and you'll get less bees in that frame you're trying to pull out. Okay, we've got quite a bit of brace comb going between these frames, which you sometimes get with naturally drawn comb. I'm just lifting that frame out. I said the first frame is the more challenging one. Once you've got one frame out, then the rest is quite easy when you have more space. Now, interestingly enough, I'm looking at this frame and it's all honey. So straight away I'm thinking, oh, has this hive got a functioning brood nest? So I'm going to put that aside and keep looking. I have a quick look here in case the queen's on this frame. Then what I'm going to do is lean it up against the entrance so that if I've missed seeing the queen, she can walk back in, because when she's in egg laying mode, she actually can't fly, and if she's too far away from the hive, she won't make it back. So now I can go across ways. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below. We'll keep answering them.
Cedar Mark's asking, can I convert my hybrid Flow Hive super by putting in more flow frames and removing the wooden ones, or do I need a whole new super?
So you can go either way. You could follow our directions on how to adapt a standard conventional bee box into a flow super, or you could purchase one of our supers if you don't want to get out their tools and modify your box. But sure, you can convert it from a hybrid into a full just by purchasing some more flow frames and getting out the tools. So next, I see a whole lot of honey and no brood. Whole lot of honey and no brood. Okay, so this hive looks like it's queenless, but let's keep looking, and that would explain why they're a bit agitated. When they're queenless, they're more agitated.
Annabelle's asking, are flow hives suitable for beginners who have never kept bees before?
Absolutely. There's less of a learning curve with all of the honey production and all of the conventional honey harvesting. We've made that very easy, and we've also got lots of beginner topics. About half of our 60,000 customers around the globe are brand new to beekeeping. So here we have some brood, which is a good sign. And if we look down the cells, what I'm doing is looking for a tiny grain of rice, which is a bee egg, in the bottom of the cell. So I'm seeing some brood, which means there has been a laying queen, but what I'm doing now is wanting to identify whether she is still laying and present in the hive, considering the numbers of brood are pretty small. Here we've got a queen cup. You can see here just where my thumb is, that's a queen cup. When it turns into a queen cell is when queen's laid an egg in it, and they draw that out further, and what you'll find is a bit of a peanut shaped, hanging downwards cell. So looking at this side, there's also some brood, but not a whole lot. So we're going to keep looking, and I'm also looking to check that the brood is healthy. When you see a sporadic pattern of brood like here, straight away want to make sure there's not sunken dark cappings, which could be a sign of AFB, one of the worst brood disease there is. But I can't see any signs of that. It just looks like the queen isn't laying a whole lot. So let's have a look at another frame to identify whether you can see that tone change. You can hear that. I'll put my mic near it. When you hear that, the bees are getting a bit more agitated. In a hive like this that's a bit agitated, you want to blow a bit more smoke in there. Just give it a moment to calm down. They get temporarily more agitated, you can hear that sound, but then they'll calm right down and we can keep working the hive. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below. Today we're discussing why 2 hives are better than 1. If we did find that this hive was queenless, we could give it some resources from another hive, being some brood that has eggs or larvae under 3 days old, in which case you could put a frame into this hive and they could raise a queen from that egg. If they get in a situation where they're queenless with no eggs or young larvae, then they actually won't be able to raise a queen themselves.
Sid, I think Eric is in Melbourne and he's wondering how late in the season can you get a nuke to start beekeeping, because by February it's not possible to get a nuke.
Okay, by February it's not possible to get a nuke.
Maybe hard to purchase.
Right. I would say that you could start in your area. You want to be starting in the spring or the summer. So you'll need to, if you can't get a nuke, then the best thing to do would be to take a split. So find someone with a hive. That's a good swarm prevention technique, is actually to take some of the frames out. So you could be helping somebody in spring management while also starting your hive. So it can be a great way to go, and it's also fun to learn together with another person. So if you can find somebody to hook up with as you start your beekeeping journey, then it's a great thing, because learning together is better than learning alone. Okay, on this frame we've got a bit of pollen. Can't see any eggs. We've got a bit of brood on this side. Can't see any eggs or larvae. So what it looks like to me is there actually isn't a laying queen, but sometime in the last 20 days we've lost the queen again in this hive. So it's been getting a bit of a bad run, because I can't see any eggs or young larvae. So what that means is we'll need to buy a queen in. You can buy queens in the mail, or we'll need to get a brood frame from another hive and insert it into this one, so they have the resources to make a queen. If they haven't got eggs, they won't be able to raise a new queen themselves. So we're going to need to have a really good look at this hive. I'm looking down the cells in the sunlight. I'm making sure I'm keeping the frame in the vertical position. If you tip it over too far, naturally drawn comb can break out. When it gets more established like this, it is a lot stronger, and you can start to tip it over.
Nicholas is in Colombia and is wondering if it's possible to measure the quality or water content of the nectar.
Absolutely. What you need to do is buy a refractometer. A refractometer uses the way light will go through sugar or water and refract on a different angle. So therefore you can tell with a refractometer the percentage of water in your honey, and what you want it to be is below 20%, so that it can keep on the shelf. It's a fun tool to have, and what you do is you just put a little bit of honey just on the glass, hold it up to the light and look through the lens, and it'll give you a scale of the moisture content. If you're concerned that you've harvested honey that's a bit runny, the other thing you can do is just eat it, and because if the moisture content's too high, it won't keep on the shelf.
Fernanda would like to know how many times a year can you harvest in Australia?
So how many times can you harvest is a great question, and the answer really varies. Some people harvest multiple times during the spring and summer and even autumn, and others might not get a good season. So like any kind of agriculture, it depends on the weather and how the flowers are going, and also how strong your bees are. If your bees are nice and strong and they're really filling the brood box and the super, there's lots of bees and there's a good flowering, it can fill very quickly. In the springtime here, you can harvest all the honey and it can be filled back up in 2 weeks. But conversely, at this time of year, it can be a few months where there's no honey coming in at all, and in colder climates there can even be 6, 7, 8 months of no honey. So it really does depend on your location. But the great thing about a flow hive is if you're unsure, you can just harvest a small amount of honey by turning the key, even just inserting it part way into one of the frames, getting yourself a small jar of honey and leaving the rest for the bees. If you see the frames really filling up, and you can watch the pattern in the rear window as the bees fill those frames with nectar, you can tell when there's a honey flow on and when there's not. And when there's a honey flow on and the bees are really filling it up, then each time a frame's full you can keep harvesting it, and that way you can maximise the amount of honey you collect. In the conventional way, beekeepers typically wait till the box is all full because it's quite a labour intensive process. You don't want to be going in there for just one frame of honey. You're going to go in there and take the box when it's full, which means, and usually multiple hives. If you're going to go through the process of the conventional extracting and spinning, then you're going to want to do more than one hive. So what that means is you're waiting till your 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 hives are full before you're going to go through that extraction process. Meanwhile, your strong hives are sitting there full, so you're losing the production of those strong hives, and it can be those strong hives that could have refilled those boxes again while you were waiting for the rest to catch up. So that way you can really keep up with the bees once the honey flow gets on. It's really quite exciting to harvest it and watch it be full again in a week or two.
Dawn has just installed her nuke. It was about 3 weeks ago. There's an outer frame that isn't being worked yet by the bees. Should she move it or leave it where it is?
Leave it where it is. Generally keep the brood nest intact and let them expand out. Now, the exception to that is come spring, where you want to put some space in the brood nest to minimise the chances of the bees swarming. That's called spring management, where you get in there and you add a frame or two in probably positions 3 and maybe 6, so that you've got fresh new area for the bees to build on, and it's the overcrowding of the brood nest and lack of space to lead to lay eggs, which is the primary cause of swarming. So that's the exception. Otherwise, keep your brood nest together, especially in the colder times, so the bees can really manage it and keep that brood warm. Okay, great questions coming in. We've got time for a couple more.
Huey found that the condensation buildup in his hive above the lid with the circle hole. In this case, does he need to use a beehive mat to prevent mildew drops onto the brood?
Okay, so if you've got a peaked roof like that, then you've got an inner cover that will catch any condensation drips. If the condensation's happening below the inner cover, then that's another reason. If you've got an answer, put it in the comments below. But basically, I don't have that issue in my hives, and generally, bees can deal with condensation issues, and it even does provide a source of water in times when they're not flying in those winter months. But you don't want the brood getting wet. So if you're finding your brood is getting wet, then that's not the best thing, and you may need to work on that. But as said, we don't have that trouble in this area.
Fernando's asking, how far do you set one hive from another?
Okay, good question. So commercial apiarists will put up to 100 hives in one location, pretty much back to back. Usually on pallets, they'll squeeze 4 onto a pallet and put another pallet just there. Now, so there isn't really a restriction on how close you can put them. You could put them bang up against each other. However, it is said that if you want to limit the drift that might spread disease from one hive to the next, then what you want to do is put 10 metres or more between your hives. So the spacing we have here is simply for convenience, enough hive to get in and around, look in the windows and observe the hives. But if say this hive got AFB, then you might find that it would drift along these next hives. So some things to consider. Generally beekeepers tend to keep them in groups or batches. Commercial beekeepers will keep typically 40 over here and 40 over there, so you're limiting the spread between those two apiaries.
Sally's asking, have you looked into offering your bees shungite?
Interesting question. So I haven't, but I have heard of shungite as a mineral to offer your bees, and there is some people saying they get great results, but I don't know a whole lot about it.
Matthew's hive colony swarmed last year. Is it better to find a local beekeeper or better to take a split to make sure your bees don't swarm?
So I find it best to take a split, because you get another hive, and more hives is always better than one. One hive can do well, another hive may not, and you really want to increase your chances of getting a great honey flow, and also provide you the resources in order to prop up a hive if it's not doing so well or it lost its queen. And you can then use the resources from one hive to help the other one get started, exactly like this case. So taking splits is a great way to do it. You can either order a queen in when you take a split, or some beekeepers do go through a spring management where they get in there and they cut off any queen cells and they try to limit the hive from swarming. I'm not so much a fan of that tactic. I'd much rather just take a split, free up some space in the brood nest, and in doing so you're kind of alleviating that overcrowdedness that's their natural tendency to swarm, but you've done the job of getting another colony as well, so it's a bit of a win-win. And if you don't want the hive, somebody else will. There's always people looking for hives.
Benjamin says that his bees filled the frames in just 7 days after he'd harvested.
Wow, so that's fantastic. It's so exciting when it's like that. You harvest all your honey, 7 days later, full again. So to do that, you need a nice strong colony and coinciding with a great nectar flow. Sometimes the flowers are hanging heavy to the ground, they've got so much nectar, and the bees can just go and get it so easily. You can actually get the bees filling it that quickly. So that's fantastic. I have heard in Canada where the nectar flow is so short and sharp and all compressed into a few months of the year, somebody saying they've got a full box in a day. Hard to believe, but that's an extreme situation. The fastest I've ever seen in my apiary is a week, so well done. That's amazing.
Simon is asking, with the moisture content of honey, if it's too high, will it keep and ferment and go off?
So if you've harvested honey too early, you've gotten a little bit keen and it's not capped, and you notice it's quite liquid in the jar. It will be quite liquid if it comes out warm, and you sit it on the shelf and it's still quite liquid. You might test with your refractometer and find it's above 20%. Then there's a few options. One, you can eat it, that's the best option. Or two, you can leave it on a shelf and it will start to ferment, and that's not so good. Or a third option is you could turn it into honey mead, which is a nice thing to mess around with. There's lots of recipes on the net about making honey mead. Okay, I'm just going to pull out this last frame here. Have a look. I'm still checking all the frames for any signs of disease issues. there is no eggs or larvae. So they've lost their queen in the last 20 days. The reason why I know it's about 20 days is there's still capped brood in the hive, and those worker bees have a 21-day brood cycle. So must have been fairly recently that they lost their queen. Bit of bad luck in this hive. It's the second time we've lost the queen, which is another reason to have more than one hive, to increase your chances of getting a really strong colony and give you the resources to prop up a colony when it's having an issue like losing the queen. The best thing we could probably do is buy in a queen, because then you get the known genetics, and also you're not sharing potential pathogens from one hive to the other. So there's factors to consider when choosing to move brood frames from one hive to the next. If you've got a good queen breeder in your area and they happen to have a queen, get it in the mail, pop it in the hive, and that, because the queen comes mated, it'll be faster to actually prop up your hive and get it going again. So we've got time for a couple more questions.
Andy's in Melbourne and he harvested in February, but since then the bees haven't touched the 2 empty flow frames except to clean them out. He's left the rest of the frames for the bees to feed on over winter. Should he remove the super or not?
Okay, good question. So what you're going to have to consider now with the winter fast approaching here is, do the bees have enough resources to survive the winter? Now in Melbourne you typically probably want at least half a box of honey for them to survive, so there might be still enough time to feed them up and getting them to store some honey, and we did cover feeding your bees a couple of videos back in our Facebook live stream. So if you want to look that up and give your bees a bit of a feed, it could be a good idea. Alternatively, you could reduce your box down, hope for the best, take the honey super off. If the colony's small, you don't want to give them too much area to look after, because it uses more honey to keep the hive warm if they've got a lot of space that they don't need. Another question?
Carol's asking, in the wild winter months coming, do you need to tie or secure your hive down, and would you restrict the entrance to the hive? Okay,
good idea. So there are reasons why you want to do an entrance reducer. Now, it's called an entrance reducer when you simply put some form of blocker in the entrance to reduce the size of it. That could be in the form of a stick or a piece of wood you put in. And what that does is it limits the amount of entrance area, which can have different advantages depending on where you are in the world. Some people in the colder climates have issues with mice, particularly in the USA and Europe, where mice will actually get in the hive and make a nest in the brood frames while your bees are balling higher up in the hive. So they can make a real mess. That could be a reason for entrance reduction. Another one would be just to limit the amount of airflow as the bees are bunkering down and keeping warm over winter. And a third reason is if your hive's weak and there's a strong hive nearby, then your hive could get robbed, and a smaller entrance will be easier for your hive to defend. So quite easy to make an entrance reducer. Just get some if you're not worried about mice, you can use wooden material, but if you are worried about mice, then look up entrance reducers online, and metal is what you'll want to use so the mice can't chew their way into your hive.
Got time for one more?
Time for one more.
Matthew's asking, if you split your hive and can't find your queen, should you let the bees make their own queen?
So you've got two choices there. You can do what's called a walk-away split, where we have we've got videos on showing you how to do that, which is basically you get some frames that have brood or eggs or larvae under 3 days old, and you shift that to your split hive, and hopefully they will raise a queen from that. However, you will leapfrog forward if you buy in a queen that's already mated, because they don't have to go through that time of raising a queen, so it'll speed up things a bit. And you also get known genetics when introducing a queen to your hive from a queen breeder, and you might prefer to have the genetics of nice calm bees or hygienic bees that'll really keep the hive queen so clean. Great questions. Thank you very much for tuning in, and tune in same time next week and we'll be showing you something interesting about beekeeping. Remember, I'm here to answer your questions, so if you've got questions, save them up and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you very much.